The galaxy was vast, older than memory itself. Stars were born, lived their bright lives, and then faded into darkness. Around those stars, countless worlds spun, and on those worlds lived countless civilizations. Some rose to greatness, others fell into dust, and many were forgotten long before their ruins turned cold. For billions of years, the galaxy had been a theater of endless wars and shifting empires. Proud species declared themselves eternal, only to vanish within centuries. Ancient powers ruled as gods, only to collapse under their own arrogance. The galaxy had no mercy. It rewarded no one for wisdom, nor did it spare the foolish. It was silent, cold, and endless. Yet through all that silence, one lesson had been carved deeply into the memory of those who survived long enough to learn. Never provoke humanity. Humans were not the strongest species. They were not the tallest, not the most intelligent, not even the longest lived. Compared to the mighty titans of the galactic core, their bodies seemed fragile, almost laughably weak. Compared to the ancient empires, their history was young, like a candle flame against a mountain of stars. And yet, every race that looked too closely at humanity, every empire that thought them weak, discovered something terrifying. Humanity had something inside them that no other species could explain. It was not strength of flesh, but strength of will. It was not their technology, for many races had far greater tools. It was something deeper, a fire that burned within their hearts. They called it determination. They called it resilience. Some even whispered the word that shook the galaxy: defiance. Humans simply refused to die. Whenever they were crushed, they rose again. Whenever they were beaten, they adapted. Whenever they were cornered, they found a way to escape, or to fight back harder than anyone thought possible. To many, they were a mystery. To others, they were dangerous. And to some, they were a promise of something greater yet to come. The galaxy had seen humanity suffer. It had seen them lose entire colonies to starvation, to raiders, to warlords. It had seen them bleed, weep, and bury their dead. But what made the galaxy tremble was what always came after. Because humans never stayed broken. There was a saying whispered in hidden taverns on distant spaceports, spoken by alien merchants who had seen human soldiers fight. If you want peace, you trade with humans. If you want death, you provoke them. Most species understood this truth. Most kept their distance or treated humans with the respect one gives to a sleeping predator. But the galaxy was wide, and arrogance was endless. And sooner or later, there would always be one who thought themselves untouchable. That arrogance came in the form of the Valkor Dominion. The Valkor were an ancient empire of conquerors. Their fleets blotted out suns, their armies crushed worlds into silence, and their rule was law to all who fell under their shadow. They believed themselves chosen by destiny to dominate all others. To them, mercy was weakness, and compassion was a disease. When they first heard of humanity, they laughed. A young race, barely united, barely advanced. Their ships were still crude by galactic standards. Their colonies spread thin across the stars. The Valkor saw them not as equals, not even as rivals, but as prey. In their arrogance, they thought they could make an example of this fragile species, and so the raids began. It started with distant colonies, far from Earth, far from the beating heart of humanity. The Valkor descended without warning, their ships burning through skies like falling stars of death. Settlements were crushed, children were taken. Entire towns were enslaved to serve the Dominion's hunger for labor. The galaxy watched in silence. Some pitied the humans. Others shook their heads, whispering that it was the end for them. After all, this was how the Valkor always grew, by finding the weak and devouring them whole. But the galaxy forgot one thing: humanity was never truly weak. Every wound cut into their flesh became a scar that hardened them. Every tear watered the soil of their rage. Every child lost was a name written into their hearts, a name they swore never to forget. The Valkor thought they were breaking humanity, but in truth, they were awakening something the galaxy had prayed would never rise again. For deep inside, the human spirit was a truth that burned brighter than any star. They would not forgive. They would not forget. And once their fire was unleashed, nothing in the galaxy could put it out. The Dominion believed they were strong enough to enslave mankind. What they did not know was that they had already signed their own death. And so, in the silent depths of the galaxy, a storm began to form. A storm unlike any that had ever come before. A storm born not of conquest, but of survival. Not of greed, but of vengeance. Not of cruelty, but of justice. The galaxy would never be the same again, because the Valkor Dominion had made one fatal mistake. They had provoked humanity, and they would become the last species in history to ever do so. The Valkor Dominion believed they were eternal. For thousands of years, they had expanded without challenge. Their fleets burned across the stars like wildfire. To them, conquest was not just survival. It was their right. Entire species had already been bent to their will. Some were enslaved, others erased, their names forgotten. The galaxy feared them, and fear kept them strong. So when they looked at humanity, they did not see danger. They saw opportunity. To the Valkor, humans were a young race, barely spreading beyond their home star, barely learning how to stand in the galaxy's endless wars. Their bodies looked weak. Their lifespans seemed short. Their fleets, compared to the Dominion, were laughable. The Valkor laughed at the idea that humans could ever resist. Their arrogance was like poison. It blinded them to the truth that other empires had already learned in whispers and scars: never corner humanity. But the Dominion's pride was too strong. They wanted to prove a point, not only to themselves, but to the rest of the galaxy. The first attack came suddenly. A human colony on the edge of known space, bright and hopeful, was chosen as the target. The colony had no weapons, no armies, only farmers, engineers, and children who dreamed of stars. The Valkor fleet came out of the void without warning. Their ships were black iron, covered in scars of 1,000 conquests. They rained fire from the sky, and in a single day, the human colony was reduced to smoke and silence. Those who survived were dragged into chains. For the Dominion, it was a simple message. This is your fate if you resist us. They broadcast their victory to nearby systems. Alien worlds trembled, and some even turned away from humans, fearing to be caught in the storm. But on Earth, the news arrived like a knife to the heart. Families waited for messages from loved ones that never came. Screens across the planet showed broken colonies, empty ruins, and Valkor ships hovering like vultures. Mothers wept for children taken. Fathers clenched fists until they bled. Brothers and sisters cried into the night. And all of humanity, across every world they had built, felt the same wound at once. The Valkor thought they had crushed human pride. But they had only lit a fire, for humans do not forget. Every scream, every tear, every scar becomes part of them. What the Dominion could not understand was that humans carry their pain forward, turning grief into strength. Soon, the raids spread. More colonies burned. More children were stolen. Entire planets cried out for help as the Dominion's warships prowled like wolves. Each attack was meant to weaken human spirit, to break them piece by piece. But with every loss, humanity only grew more united. On Mars, soldiers who had never seen real war swore oaths to defend their people. On Luna, Engineers worked day and night, turning peaceful ships into weapons. On Earth, leaders who once argued about borders now spoke with one voice. Humanity will not bow. The Valkor did not listen. They believed humans would collapse, as so many others had. To them, resistance was foolish. They were certain that their power, their ancient fleets, and their endless cruelty would always win. But in the dark, behind the silence of grief, humanity prepared its answer. Across the galaxy, aliens watched closely. Some pitied humans, believing they were doomed. Others waited to see if this young race would vanish like so many before. And a few, those who had seen humans fight in smaller battles, whispered warnings the Dominion refused to hear. "Do not push them," they said. "You do not understand what they become when they are cornered." But arrogance is deaf. The Dominion kept striking, and humanity kept bleeding. Yet within that pain was a promise. Each attack, each raid, each enslaved child was like fuel thrown into a fire. Humanity was no longer just surviving, they were changing. In every home, people spoke of revenge. In every colony, soldiers trained not only for defense but for war. Humanity was not the strongest, but they were learning faster than the Dominion could imagine. Their minds adapted, their technology advanced, and their hearts hardened. The spark of arrogance that the Valkor had lit was now a flame burning in every human soul. And soon, that flame would rise into a firestorm. Because the Valkor had made the same mistake all tyrants make. They believed pain would make humans weaker. But pain only made them unstoppable. The galaxy watched. The Valkor laughed. Humanity grieved. And somewhere in the silent night, the first whispers of war began. The Dominion thought they had broken humanity. But in truth, they had only awakened them. And once humanity was awake, nothing in the galaxy could put them back to sleep. The raids did not stop. One by one, human colonies fell silent, either destroyed or enslaved. Every time a Valkor fleet struck, they left only ashes and despair behind. To the Dominion, it was a campaign of control. To humanity, it was a wound carved deeper and deeper into their soul. On Earth, there was silence at first. A silence filled with grief, anger, and helplessness. Families lit candles for those who would never return. Children asked their parents why monsters from the HFY. Stars hated them. Old veterans of Earth's ancient wars stared at the sky, knowing the galaxy was now testing their people. But silence does not last long in human hearts. From grief rose determination. From anger came unity. Humanity had been many nations once, divided by borders, languages, and endless arguments. But now the enemy was not human. It was something alien, something cruel, something that threatened all of them. Suddenly, those old divisions seemed foolish, small, meaningless. Humanity did what the galaxy thought impossible. They united. Across Earth's cities, leaders stood side by side, speaking not as rivals, but as one voice. Across Mars and Luna, workers turned every factory into a forge of war. Ships once built, for trade were armored with steel and plasma cannons. Old space stations became fortresses. Weapons that had been only dreams in laboratories were rushed into reality. Humanity's message to the stars was short and sharp: we will not bow. When the united human fleet rose, the galaxy trembled. It was not the largest fleet, nor the most advanced, but it burned with something no other armada carried: a soul. Every ship carried not only soldiers, but also stories. A pilot flew not only for orders, but for a lost brother. A commander led not only for honor, but for a child, taken in chains. Every battle would be personal. Every strike would be revenge. The Valkor laughed when they saw the first human fleets leave Earth. They saw fragile ships, smaller weapons, inexperienced crews. To them, it was almost amusing. They expected a short war, one final crushing, blow to silence this stubborn species. But the Dominion had made a fatal mistake, for humans do not measure strength only by numbers or weapons. Their true strength lies in desperation, in will, in the refusal to surrender when all hope seems gone. The first clash came in the cold void of a nameless system. A small Valkor fleet met what they thought was an easy target, a group of human frigates and one untested battleship. The Valkor commanders were so confident that they broadcast their arrival openly, promising to erase the humans within hours. The battle did not last hours, it lasted 3 days. 3 days of fire and blood. 3 days where humans refused to retreat, refused to surrender. Their ships, smaller and weaker, fought with a fury that made even seasoned Valkor captains hesitate. When their weapons ran low, they rammed enemy cruisers. When their shields failed, they turned wrecked ships into traps. Every human death bought time for another strike, another chance, another hope. And when the smoke cleared, the Valkor fleet was gone, destroyed, broken. The human fleet was torn apart, but not erased. They limped home carrying the bodies of their dead. But they carried something else as well. Proof that the Dominion could bleed. Proof that humanity could fight them. Proof that the galaxy's so-called gods of war were not untouchable. That first victory lit a fire across every human world. Recruits poured into the military. Scientists worked without sleep. Colonists who once feared the stars now looked at them with defiance. Humanity had tasted blood, and it only sharpened their hunger. The Valkor responded with rage. They sent larger fleets, more powerful weapons, determined to crush this insolent species. But every time the humans found a way to resist. They studied every battle, learned every weakness, adapted to every loss. Where other species would break, humanity grew stronger. Where others surrendered, humanity pressed forward. Admirals of alien races who once mocked humanity now watched in silence. They remembered their own wars with the Dominion, how quickly their people had fallen, how swiftly their resistance had broken. But humanity was different. Humanity was not only fighting for survival, they were fighting for justice. One human admiral spoke before his weary fleet after a bloody battle. "We are not here for revenge. We are here so no child, human or alien, will ever suffer under them again." Those words spread through human space like fire. It was no longer only about defending Earth. It was about ending the Dominion. And so battle after battle, system after system, the tide began to turn. The Dominion still laughed, still raged, still believed their empire eternal. But in the shadows of their arrogance, a truth was rising like dawn. Humanity was coming. Humanity would not stop. Humanity would not forgive. The galaxy had seen wars before, but it had never seen a war like this one, because this was no ordinary conflict. This was humanity's answer to the spark of arrogance. And soon the Valkor would understand the one lesson they had refused to learn. Never provoke humanity. The Valkor Dominion had never known fear. For thousands of years, they had conquered without challenge, their fleets sweeping across the stars like a tide of iron. World after world had bent before them, and those who resisted were crushed into dust. Fear was their greatest weapon, and, for generations, it had never failed them. But now something was different. The humans had not broken. They had not surrendered. They had not begged for mercy. Instead, they fought back with a fire the Valkor could not understand. The Dominion's commanders grew restless as reports arrived from the front lines. Fleets destroyed, outposts burned, strongholds overrun. For the first time in living memory, the Dominion was losing. At first, they refused to believe it. How could a young species, fragile and untested, stand against the might of an empire that had ruled the stars for millennia? How could farmers, miners, and settlers, turned soldiers overnight, defeat the most feared warriors in the galaxy? But the truth was written in the ruins of their own fleets. Every battle told the same story. Humans refused to fight like other races. They did not retreat when outnumbered. They did not surrender when surrounded. Even when defeat seemed certain, they fought on with a madness the Valkor could not comprehend. A single human frigate, cornered by 3 cruisers, would still attack, clawing and tearing until its last breath. Colonists, armed with little, more than rifles and courage, could hold ground against entire battalions. To the Dominion, it was madness. To the galaxy, it was human will. The Valkor learned fear. For every planet they burned, humanity took 2 of theirs. For every child. Enslaved, humanity freed 100 more. For every victory the Dominion claimed, humanity answered with vengeance so swift it shook the stars. The galaxy, once silent, began to whisper. Alien worlds that had once avoided humans now watched with awe. Some prayed for their success. Others trembled at the fury they unleashed. Old enemies of the Dominion saw hope where there had been none. For if the humans could stand against the Dominion, perhaps the nightmare could truly end. But within the Dominion itself, cracks began to show. Soldiers who once marched with pride now hesitated. Commanders argued among themselves. Whispers of defeat spread through the halls of power. The Dominion's pride was shattering, and with it, their control. And still, the humans pressed on. Admiral Rain, one of humanity's most respected leaders, stood before his fleet after another bloody victory. His face was tired, his uniform torn, but his voice carried strength. "We are not fighting for revenge alone," he told his soldiers. "We are fighting so that no world, human or alien, will ever again kneel before tyrants. We are fighting to end the Dominion." Those words became a fire in every soldier's heart. This was no longer a war of survival. It was a crusade for freedom. Humanity was not just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every race the Dominion had enslaved, every voice silenced, every dream crushed under their iron rule. The war raged on and the Dominion bled. Entire Valkor fleets were ambushed and destroyed. Colonies that had been under their rule for centuries rose in rebellion, inspired by human courage. The empire that once stretched across the stars was shrinking, piece by piece, system by system. The Dominion's arrogance, once unshakable, began to crumble. They sent envoys offering peace, promises of treaties, whispers of compromise. But humanity remembered the children stolen in chains, the worlds burned to ash, the families torn apart. Peace was no longer enough. The answer humanity gave was silence. Their fleets continued forward, burning through the Dominion's stars like a storm that could not be stopped. One by one, the proud fortresses of the Dominion fell. Once, they had been symbols of eternal power. Now they were ruins, reminders of a lesson the galaxy had almost forgotten. You cannot break humanity. The Dominion had believed themselves untouchable. But every empire has its end, and theirs had arrived. And as the humans pushed deeper into their heartland, the truth became undeniable. The Valkor Dominion was falling. The galaxy had waited centuries for this day, and it was humanity, young, fragile, and underestimated, that was delivering the final blow. The Dominion's leaders trembled. Their soldiers wavered, their fleets shattered, and the galaxy held its breath, watching the impossible unfold. For the first time in history, the great Valkor Dominion, the empire of fear, the shadow that had ruled for millennia, was standing on the edge of destruction, and it was humanity that had brought them. The war had burned for years now. Stars themselves seemed to tremble under the weight of destruction. Systems once filled with light and trade now stood silent, their skies scarred by the wreckage of fleets. The Valkor Dominion had thought, themselves eternal, But humanity's relentless fire was tearing them apart piece by piece. Still, the cost was heavy. Humanity bled with every battle. Ships were lost, colonies scarred, families broken. Each victory was paid for with countless lives. Soldiers returned home in coffins, or did not return at all. Mothers wept. Fathers carried the weight of empty homes, and children grew up too fast under the shadow of war. And yet, humanity did not falter. Their spirit was unbroken, and their resolve only grew stronger. Every loss fueled their determination. Every death whispered a promise into the hearts of the living. We will not stop until the Dominion is gone. The Dominion still tried to hide their fear with arrogance. They boasted of ancient weapons, of new fleets being built, of strategies that would crush humanity once and for all. But behind closed doors, their leaders argued in desperation. They had never faced an enemy like this, for the humans did not fight only with ships and weapons. They fought with memory, with grief, with love for those they had lost. They carried their dead into every battle, not as burdens, but as reasons to win. The turning point came at the Battle of Laura's Gate. It was a system of great importance to the Dominion, a fortress world that guarded the heart of their empire. Its skies bristled with defenses, its orbital rings gleamed with weapons strong enough to shatter moons. The Dominion was certain no enemy could breach it. When the human fleet arrived, the Valkor commanders laughed. They believed this would finally be the moment humanity was broken, the moment their defiance would end. They assembled a fleet greater than any seen before, prepared to crush the humans in one decisive strike. But the humans did not arrive to survive. They arrived to win. The battle raged for days. The skies burned with fire. The void itself screamed with explosions. Human ships darted between massive cruisers, striking weak points with deadly precision. Where the Dominion expected retreat, the humans pressed forward. Where they expected fear, they found only fury. When human ships fell, others rushed to fill the gap. When their weapons failed, they rammed enemy vessels, turning their own destruction into victory. The Dominion's commanders watched in disbelief as the humans refused to break, even when outnumbered, even when death seemed certain. And then came the moment that changed everything. The Dominion's flagship, the Dread Sun, stood as a symbol of their eternal rule. It was a massive warship, said to be invincible. For centuries, it had led their fleets to victory. Its presence alone was meant to break the will of enemies, but in the chaos of the battle, a squadron of human ships broke through its defenses. They were small, battered, and burning, but they pressed on. They fought their way to the flagship, sacrificing everything to bring it down. And in a final act of defiance, the human ships rammed into the Dread Sun's heart. Explosions ripped through its core, and the great flagship, pride of the Dominion, was torn apart in a blaze that lit the system for hours. When the fire faded, silence fell. The Dominion's greatest symbol was gone. Their unshakable pride had been shattered, and the galaxy knew, at last, that the Valkor could be defeated. For the humans, it was more than a victory. It was a turning point. Hope surged through their fleets. Soldiers cheered even as they wept for the fallen. Colonists raised their voices, knowing the tide had finally shifted. Admiral Rain stood before his weary fleet. His voice carried across every channel. "This is not the end," he said, his tone steady, his eyes filled with fire. "This is the beginning of their end. We do not fight for revenge. We fight so that no child, human or alien, will ever live in chains again. We fight so that freedom will rise where their shadow once stood. Today, we have shown the galaxy the truth. The Dominion can fall. And it will fall." Those words spread beyond the fleet, across every human world. They were repeated in homes, in factories, in schools. They became more than words. They became a vow. And across alien worlds, long enslaved by the Dominion, whispers turned to hope. Some even rose in rebellion, inspired by the humans who dared to do the impossible. The Valkor Dominion had built their empire on fear, but now fear had turned against them. The galaxy no longer saw them as untouchable. They saw them as prey, and leading the hunt was humanity, burning with a fire that no darkness could extinguish. The Battle of Laura's Gate was not just a victory. It was the turning point of the war. From that day forward, the Dominion's fall was no longer a question of if. It was only a question of when. The destruction of the dread sun spread like thunder through the galaxy. For centuries, the Valkor Dominion had ruled with arrogance, their power unquestioned, their ships feared across every star. But now their greatest weapon, their pride, had been shattered by human hands. The galaxy could hardly believe it. Traders whispered the news in every port. Soldiers on distant worlds spoke of it as if it were a myth. Entire species, long crushed under the Dominion's shadow, looked to the skies with hope for the first time in generations. The humans had done the impossible. They had struck the heart of the Dominion and lived. But humanity was not finished there. Grief had become fury. Their fury had become fire. And now that fire spread across the stars. The united human fleet no longer fought just to defend their homes. They pushed forward, deeper and deeper into Dominion space. Every planet they reached carried scars of slavery and oppression. Chains broken, banners burned, people freed, and everywhere they went, they left a message behind. Humanity has come. You are free. For the Dominion, it was a nightmare. Their fleets rushed to stop the humans, but each time they were met with resistance unlike any they had ever known. Humans did not fight like an empire. They fought like survivors. They turned every trap into an ambush, every retreat into an advance. Even in defeat, they planted seeds of rebellion, leaving behind hope that would rise long after the battle was over. The galaxy had seen wars before, but this war was different. It was not just fought with weapons, it was fought with belief. Humanity carried with them not only their own hope, but the hope of countless others. The Valkor could not understand it. They could not comprehend how humans kept moving forward despite endless losses. Ships destroyed, worlds burned, comrades fallen, and yet the humans rose again, stronger each time. One Valkor commander, before his defeat, whispered in despair, "They fight as if death means nothing to them." But he was wrong. Death meant everything to the humans. Every soldier lost was remembered, every name carried into the next battle. Every fallen comrade became a reason to fight harder. Humanity did not fear death, they carried it as a weapon. Across the stars, the Dominion's power crumbled. On occupied worlds, slaves rose up against their masters, inspired by the stories of human courage. Chains were broken, rebellions spread like wildfire, and the Dominion's grip loosened with every passing day. For the first time in their history, the Valkor begged for mercy. Envoys were sent to the humans, offering peace, offering treaties, offering bribes of wealth and land. But humanity remembered the children stolen in chains. They remembered the colonies turned to ash. They remembered the silence of worlds where families had lived, laughed, and dreamed before the Dominion came. Mercy had been buried with them. Humanity gave no answer to the offers of peace. Their fleets simply pressed forward. Admiral Rain, standing before his weary commanders, spoke words that echoed across every ship. "We did not start this war, but we will finish it. We will not stop until the Dominion is gone, not for us alone, but for the galaxy, so that no empire of fear will ever rise again." His words were carried through the ranks, through the stars, through the whispers of the galaxy itself. Humanity was no longer just fighting for revenge. They were fighting for freedom, for themselves, and for everyone who had ever lived under the Dominion's shadow. The Valkor fought harder, more desperate than ever. They unleashed weapons that had been hidden for centuries, devices so destructive they scarred planets. But the humans adapted. Every new weapon became a challenge to overcome. Every desperate strike a chance to prove their resilience. And always, always, the humans pressed forward. The galaxy watched in awe and terror. Some feared what humanity would become once the war ended. Others prayed for their victory, seeing them as the last hope against tyranny. But all agreed on one truth. The Valkor Dominion was dying. The fire of humanity was burning through their stars, and nothing could stop it. The Dominion's once proud fleets were scattered wrecks. Their generals fought among themselves. Their people whispered of defeat. Their empire crumbled faster with each battle. What had once seemed eternal was now breaking apart before the eyes of the galaxy, and at the center of it all was humanity, relentless, unstoppable, and unyielding. Tut, fire they carried was not only theirs. It had become the fire of every enslaved world, every silenced voice, every broken dream. The humans carried the galaxy's pain as their own, and with it, they marched forward, erasing the Dominion's shadow with every step. The Valkor had thought themselves gods. But before humanity's fire, they were nothing but ashes waiting to fall, and soon their last fortress, their last stronghold, would face the storm. The galaxy had grown silent. Every race, every world, every fleet watched as the humans marched toward the final heart of the Valkor Dominion, the last fortress world, the place from where the Dominion had ruled for thousands of years. It was not just a planet, it was a symbol, a world wrapped in rings of steel, defended by walls of fire, guarded by fleets so vast that they could blot out the stars. The Valkor had called it eternal, unbreakable, untouchable. To them, it was the throne of gods, but to humanity, it was the last chain, and chains were made to be broken. The united human fleet gathered on the edge of the system. Thousands of ships, scarred from endless battles, engines burning, weapons armed. The crews were exhausted, their eyes heavy with memories of loss, but not one soul turned away. They knew this was the end. Either the Dominion would fall, or humanity would be erased. Admiral Rain stood on the command deck of the flagship Eternal Flame. His face was carved with lines of war, his voice calm but heavy with fire. Around him stood the captains of every surviving fleet. Some were young, barely more than children. Others were veterans who had seen too many wars. All of them listened as he spoke. "We have come farther than anyone believed possible," Rain said, his voice steady. "They told us we would break. They told us we would kneel. But we are still standing. This is the last fortress. When it falls, the Dominion ends. When it ends, the galaxy is free." The room was silent. Every captain looked at him, and every heart beat with the same fire. Rain's last words carried across the fleet, broadcast into every ship, every ear. For Earth, for the fallen, for the future. And the fleet moved. The stars lit up with war. The Dominion unleashed everything they had. Their fleets poured from the fortress like rivers of fire, tens of thousands of warships, weapons burning so bright that even the void seemed to shake. The humans met them head-on. The battle was chaos. Ships collided in storms of plasma and steel. Fighters danced like sparks between titans. Hulls shattered. Flames burned across the blackness of space, and the screams of dying ships echoed on every channel. But the humans pressed forward. Even when ships were torn apart, others filled the gap. Even when fleets broke, survivors regrouped and struck again. Every human ship carried the memory of a destroyed world. Every gun fired with the weight of a fallen family. The Dominion fought like rulers desperate to keep their throne. Humanity fought like souls who had nothing left to lose. The fortress rings glowed as their massive cannons fired, tearing holes in the human fleets. One human carrier fell, engulfed in fire, but before it died, it rammed into a Valkor dreadnought, dragging it into the abyss. A single act of sacrifice, one among thousands, but each one cut deeper into the Dominion's strength. Admiral Rain watched as the battle raged, his face calm but his eyes blazing. The reports were endless, losses on every front but gains, too. Piece by piece, the humans were breaking through. Then the fortress unleashed its greatest weapon, a beam of pure destruction, large enough to split a moon in half, cut across the battlefield. Dozens of human ships were turned to ash in an instant. Silence followed, a silence filled with horror. But from the wreckage, a single voice crackled through the comms. A young pilot, his ship burning, his voice broken, but unafraid. "They can burn us," he said, coughing through smoke. "But they can never kill us all. Humanity will reach them. Humanity will end them." The message spread across the fleet, and once again the fire rose. The humans fought harder. They drove their ships straight into the storm, refusing to retreat. Even the Dominion began to feel fear. For every ship they destroyed, 2 more pressed forward. For every soldier they killed, 10 more rose with vengeance in their hearts. At last, the human fleet broke through the outer defenses. The fortress world loomed ahead, its surface burning with the light of millions of weapons. Rain gave the order. "All fleets converge. End this." Human ships poured through the gap, diving toward the fortress like arrows of fire. The Dominion scrambled to stop them, but it was too late. The final stage of the war had begun. On the surface of the fortress, human ground forces landed, storming the citadels, breaking through walls of steel. Every street was a battlefield, every tower a mountain of fire. The Valkor fought with desperation, their pride crumbling as their home burned, but humanity did not stop. They climbed the walls, they crossed the fire, they carried their banners through the smoke. Every step was a promise, every strike was justice. The Valkor had thought themselves eternal. Now their eternity was ending. The fortress shook as explosions tore through its heart. Human soldiers raised their weapons high, their voices roaring across the burning city. For Earth! For freedom! For the galaxy! The Dominion's last fortress was crumbling. The end was not far, and deep in the command halls of the fortress, the Valkor rulers waited, knowing that humanity was coming for them. They had provoked the last species they should have ever touched, and now their history was about to be erased forever. The Dominion's fortress world burned. The sky was split by fire, the ground shook with endless explosions, and the great towers of the Valkor collapsed, one by one. What had once been a symbol of their eternal power was now a grave of ash. Human soldiers pressed forward through the ruins. Their boots struck the broken streets, their rifles lit the smoke, their banners rose against the choking skies. Every step was heavy with sacrifice. Every breath carried the names of the fallen. The Valkor still fought, but their pride was gone. Their roars were not of rulers anymore, but of cornered beasts. They had called themselves eternal. They had believed no one could touch them. But now, as humanity stormed their final stronghold, they knew the truth. They had awoken the one enemy they should have never provoked. Inside the shattered citadel, Admiral Rain led the final push. His face was streaked with dust, his armor dented, but his eyes burned with purpose. Around him, soldiers advanced, firing through the halls that once glowed with the arrogance of the Dominion. Now those halls echoed with screams and thunder. "Forward," Rain said quietly, his voice steady despite the chaos. "No more chains, no more masters. End this," and the humans obeyed. The last defenders of the Valkor broke under the weight of human fury. Their lines collapsed, their war machines shattered, their banners fell into the fire. Step by step, the humans reached the heart of the citadel. There, waiting in the throne chamber, were the rulers of the Valkor, the High Council. Cloaked in shadows, armored in pride, they stood tall even as the walls around them crumbled. Their eyes glowed with rage, fear, and disbelief. One of them spoke, his voice shaking but still full of defiance. Humans, you were meant to be slaves. You were meant to bow, to serve, to vanish in silence. How did you come this far? How did you survive? Rain stepped forward, his boots echoing against the broken floor. His voice was calm, almost soft, but it carried, like thunder. Because you forgot what we are. You forgot what it means to be human. You took our worlds. You burned our families. You thought fear would break us. But we are not so easily broken. We rise. We fight. And we never stop until the last chain shatters. The council hissed, their claws trembling. One of them roared, "If you destroy us, the galaxy will lose its order. Chaos will consume all." Rain's eyes turned cold. The galaxy was never yours to rule. Today your order dies. He raised his weapon. His soldiers followed. The chamber filled with light and fire. When it ended, the High Council was gone. Their bodies lay in silence, their pride burned away. The last rulers of the Dominion had fallen. For a moment, the chamber was quiet. Only the sound of crumbling stone remained. Then, slowly, one by one, the human soldiers raised their rifles high. Their voices rose together, echoing through the ruins, a roar so powerful it shook even the dying walls. For Earth, for freedom, the Mao cry carried across the fortress, through the burning skies, into every human heart across the battlefield. It was the cry of victory, the cry of justice, the cry of a species that had been underestimated for too long. The Dominion was no more. Across the galaxy, word spread faster than light. The Valcor Dominion, the empire that had ruled for thousands of years, had been erased. Entire fleets went silent. Colonies abandoned their masters. Worlds that had once trembled now looked to the stars in hope, and everywhere one truth was whispered again and again. Never provoke humanity. Never awaken their fire. For if they rise against you, your name will vanish forever. On the ruined fortress world, Rain stood with his soldiers, looking out over the destruction. The price had been terrible. Billions of humans had been lost in the long war. Countless homes destroyed, countless families shattered. Victory had come, but it was written in blood. A young soldier beside him, her face streaked with tears, whispered, "Was it worth it, Admiral? After all this death?" Rain closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of Earth, of the broken cities, of the graves of the fallen. He thought of the children who would now live without fear, of the galaxy freed from the Dominion's chains. When he opened his eyes, they were steady. "Yes," he said quietly, "because now the future belongs to the living, and no one will ever dare to chain us again." The soldier nodded, her tears shining like stars in the smoke. Around them, the human flag was raised over the ruins of the fortress. It flew high, its fabric torn, but it burned with pride. The last fortress,